The original Game Boy didn't look like the future of gaming. It was a small gray brick with a tiny green screen. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't powerful, it didn't even have a colored screen, but yet it changed gaming forever. Now, I never owned one myself. The first Game Boy I owned was a Game Boy Pocket, but I understand how important the original was for the industry. So how did the little gray brick become such a legend? Well, let's go back to the beginning. See, in the 1980s, Nintendo was on top of the world. The NES has saved the gaming industry after the crash of 1983. Kids everywhere were playing Super Mario Bros. And Duck Hunt. Nintendo could have kept focusing on home consoles. They already were winning. But one man at Nintendo wanted something different. His name was Gunpei Yokoi. He believed in what we call lateral thinking with withered technology. That sounds fancy. It simply means using older, cheaper parts in creative ways. You don't always need the newest tech to make something great. You just need a clever idea. He had already worked on the Game & Watch handhelds. In case you don't know what they are, well, these were small, simple games with a single screen. You could play them anywhere and they were big hits. So we wondered, what if you could play real video games on the go? Not just simple beeps and buttons, but full games with swappable cartridges, just like the NES. That idea became the Game Boy, and Nintendo showed the system for the first time in 1989. It was small, it was gray, it had a tiny green screen that only displayed black and dark green pixels. It didn't light up, so you needed good lighting to see anything, but it had something better than a fancy color screen. The Game Boy could run for 10 to 15 hours on just 4 AA batteries. That was huge. Other handhelds at the time didn't even come close. I mean, have you ever had your phone die when you really needed it? Imagine that, but during a long car trip in 1989. The Game Boy saved kids from boredom. And parents, they loved it too. It was cheaper than the competition. It only cost $89.99 in the United States. That would be equivalent to about $235 in today's money. So yeah, that's not cheap today, but back then it was affordable enough to become a hit. And Nintendo packed a game inside every box, a game that changed everything. That being Tetris, which was perfect for the handheld. Anyone could learn it in seconds. It didn't need a story or characters. You just rotate falling blocks to form lines. It became an instant addiction. Kids played it, parents played it, grandparents played it, people who didn't care about video games played it. The Game Boy brought gaming to new audiences everywhere. Imagine riding a train and seeing everyone matching falling shapes. Well, that was real life. The Game Boy wasn't just a toy, it was a global hit. Then came the big names. Super Mario Land turned Mario into a portable star. It wasn't as flashy as the NES games, but it was Mario in your hands. That alone made it special. The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening brought a huge adventure to a tiny screen. Many people still call it one of the best handheld games ever made. There were sports games, puzzle games, and even weird experiments. The Game Boy became home to every kind of game you could imagine. And developers, they liked working on it too. The hardware was simple, the audience was massive, so game libraries kept growing year after year. Do you remember blowing into cartridges to make them work? Well, Game Boy owners, they did that a lot. Nintendo didn't stop adding new features. One of the coolest ideas was the Game Link cable. This little wire connected two Game Boys together. Now players could battle or trade items with friends. That small cable helped create a global social gaming culture long before Wi-Fi existed. Nintendo also released add-ons. Some were useful, some were strange. There was a light to see the screen in the dark. There was a camera that printed small photos. There was even a Game Boy printer for stickers. The Game Boy was more than a console. It was a toolbox for creative ideas. Then came the biggest moment of all. In 1996, Game Freak released Pokémon Red and Pokémon Green in Japan. Kids were suddenly catching creatures everywhere they went. The game fit perfectly with the link cable. If you wanted to complete your Pokédex, you had to trade with someone else. That turned playgrounds into trading hubs. Have you ever accidentally traded something with a friend and hope you didn't regret it later? Well, that was Pokemon. Now, when Pokemon launched in North America in 1998, it exploded even bigger. The Game Boy became a must-have item all over again. Sales, they skyrocketed. The Game Boy had already been successful. Pokemon made it unstoppable. The craziest part, by the time Pokemon arrived, the Game Boy was already old technology. Other companies tried to beat it many times. Like Sega, they released the Game Gear in 1990. It had a bright colored screen and looked amazing, but it ate batteries like candy. Atari made the Lynx. It was more powerful and had colors too, but it was bulky and expensive. Now, there were other handhelds also that I'm not going to mention, but just know that they all failed. But why? Well, because Yokoi's philosophy worked. Battery life, simplicity, and fun mattered more than specs. The Game Boy might not have looked modern, but it worked everywhere. You could take it camping, you could play it under your desk at school, you could bring it on a long family trip. And sometimes the best technology isn't the biggest or strongest, it's the one that fits into your life. The Game Boy lasted far longer than anyone expected. Nintendo released the Game Boy Pocket in 1996. It was smaller and lighter. The screen was easier to see, but it still played every Game Boy game. Then came the Game Boy Color in 1998. Now games had bright colors. Fans loved it, developers kept making games for years. Even when the Game Boy Advance arrived in 2001, the original Game Boy library still mattered. It lived through 3 generations of handhelds. More than 118 million Game Boy and Game Boy Color systems were sold worldwide. That number says everything. The Game Boy wasn't just a success, it was a cultural milestone. Sadly, life doesn't stay the same forever. Gunpei Yokoi left Nintendo before the Game Boy Color launched. He worked on new ideas with his own company, but in 1997 he died in a tragic car accident. The man who helped bring handheld gaming to millions never saw how truly huge his creation became. People still honor him today. Every time you pick up a Nintendo handheld or play a game on your phone, you're experiencing the idea he helped create. That being portable fun for everyone. The Game Boy changed how we think about games. It showed that games didn't need to be stuck in the living room. They could fit in your pocket. They could go anywhere. They could be shared with friends in a park or in a backseat of a car. The Game Boy proved that creativity matters more than raw power, and that we want fun first and complicated second.